Let's see, we're going to have to do a little bit of Bible study real quick. How many of you know that Jesus threw out the money changers of the temple? Okay. Does anyone know what the purpose of the money changers in the temple was?
I thought it was so people could buy an animal to sacrifice and they needed change, either in coinage type or amount.
Close. That's part of it, but that's not the reason there were money changers.
It was to convert from Roman and other funds to Jewish funds.
But it was to change the type of currency. So, does anyone remember the first commandment? Yes, and you shall have no other gods before me, right? And then don't create graven images. Now that's not graven images of God, it's graven images, period, right? So, does any of you have a coin on you? No, because that's the world that we live in, right? Ha-ha! You got one. Okay, tell me what's on it. Lincoln, and what's it say above it? That's right. So Roman coins have a picture of Caesar on them, but do you know what the title says? Son of God. You got one too. Denarius is a day's wage. What's yours say? A denarius is a day's wage, but it's a day's wage in Roman coin, and Roman coin has the picture of the emperor on it and has his title, Son of God. This is important for us to remember when we read scripture and we give Jesus the title Son of God, because it's not just a religious title, it's a political title, it's a seditious title. It's a title that makes Jesus counter the power of Rome, which is part of why they murdered him on that. That's for political prisoners, that's for sedition, that's for treason, that's not for banditry or robbery or being sassy. Damn it, they didn't murder him for being sassy. They murdered him for sedition and treason. Yes?
Okay, so at Golgotha, there were the two others, and they were thieves.
So,
but they were not, were they political?
Yes, so the word in the Greek is not thief, it's bandit, and a bandit is someone who steals from the crown. It's like a pirate. So when we think of pirates of the Caribbean, who are they robbing? They're robbing the ships owned by the British Navy. When you're a pirate, you're stealing from the crown. You're not just burglaring randos, right? You're going for the big bucks. So you've got to remember that the reason the money changers are there is they're not just shisty grifters that are trying to steal from people. They're actually trying to preserve the integrity of Jewish worship, to say none of this idolatrous BS can be in the temple. This is a way of maintaining a sense of ritualistic purity, right? And so it's a boundary to say, in here, we're doing things different. We're not going to operate in here the way that we operate out there. And in order to enforce that, we're going to change our money over when we come in, so that we're all committed to this economic system that only works in here. It's like Chuck E. Cheese tokens.
Yeah.
You can't spend them anywhere else, but in here, we can play. In here, we can be together. In here, they are of value, and they are of value to us. And so there's this certain communitas that happens when you change your money over, because we say, we're in this together, and this has value for us. There's actually a really significant spiritual value to the fact of changing over the money, because what are we saying? We're saying this is valuable. Right? But we don't learn that for some reason. Even a friend of mine, I had to school her on this. I felt bad, but I had to school her on this because she was about to preach on this text and she had no idea. And I'm like, oh, this is really critical. This is really important. But we forget this part. So there's that part. Then there's this other part that the Pharisees are there, and who came with the Pharisees? Herodians. Herodians comes from Herod. Herod being the kind of placed leader, right, of the Jewish people, the puppet state, right, who gets to think he's in charge, and people like to believe he's in charge, but he's just making sure he doesn't get murdered by Rome and replaced immediately. The Pharisees and the Herodians don't want anything to do with each other, because the Pharisees are the people that are committed to maintaining purity. They're the ones that believe that if we do this right, if we follow all the rules and ordinances, then God will break through the sky and set fire to our enemies and wipe clean the world for everybody that wasn't doing what we were doing, right? And the Herodians are like, yeah, that ain't gonna happen. We're gonna align ourselves with power. That's how we're gonna survive. We're gonna become middle management, well, very lower middle management to power, right? There's no actual, I mean, Paul was a citizen, so he was like middle management, but like these guys are not even citizens of the empire. They're just trying to align themselves with the puppet government that's aligned with empire, right? So these guys do not like each other. But here they are, and they've got Jesus, and so they go on this long preamble, right? Like, oh, you great teacher of the law who knows all things and shows no partiality. No partiality. Who's right? Do we pay taxes to Caesar, or do we not pay taxes to Caesar? Right? They're trying to get him to pick sides, obviously, just like every little child wants to do when they have an argument. They're trying to compromise, but they don't want to compromise, so they just go to an adult and say, who's right? Who's right? Tell me I'm right, please. And then what does Jesus do? This is so awesome. What does he do? What's his move? Show me the coin. Now, where are they? They're in the temple. So nobody should be able to do this because of the money changers. So when he says, you hypocrites, show me the coin, they are proving they're hypocrites by producing the coin. Because they have not participated in the communitas of the monetary system. They're bringing idolatrous coinage into the temple. Why? Because they know that Chuck E. Cheese tokens aren't worth anything. Because they know, let me back up, they believe that this is all performance and theater and not power. They don't actually trust. You got to keep that Roman coinage because that's where power is. So they got it on them. That could be the end of this section. The fact that they produce it should convict them immediately. But we don't know that because we don't know about the temple tax, we don't know about the money changes, and so we forget this stuff, and so we're like, oh, the radical stuff comes after. That's the radical moment, actually. But then he says this thing. He says, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. What are the things that are Caesar's? And what are the things that, maybe I'll start with this question. What are the things that are God's? What's the very first thing you heard in this worship service spoken by someone that wasn't me? It's right there in your bulletin. The earth is the Lord's and all that is on it. You know, the traditional rendering of this is like, this is an easy choice, right? Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and give to God the things that are God's. Well, everything's God's, so nothing is Caesar's, right? How's that? Does that feel true? Does that feel cheap? Cheap gotcha? That feels like a cheap gotcha to me. This idea that, you know, everything's God. Because, you know what? Caesar's actually got a lot of stuff. But let me just double down on this point for a second. Sometimes it's easier to let some stuff be Caesar's because it gives you more freedom. And I'll give you one quick example. You know, we're living the 21st century, right? And we want to be ecologically conscious, right? So, how long does plastic last? Just imagine for a second, think back over your week, and imagine for a second that you're going to live an entire week without making any plastic garbage. How much thought energy do you have for anything else in your life? That's what purity culture does to us. Is it says to us, oh yeah, you can do it right until you start thinking about doing it right. And then you realize that all of your energy would be committed to that one place where you could be right. Pick anything else. Plastic garbage is just an easy one. Pick anything else and try to be absolutely right and good about it. And how much creative freedom you lose in the rest of your life because you're trying to be good on it. It's not going to work. Sometimes, some stuff is Caesar's because trying to keep it from being Caesar's is going to limit our freedom. Now, what are the things that are Caesar's? Domination, exploitation, judgment, and earned righteousness. Now, the first ones are easy. Domination and exploitation. It's easy to think we can be free of that. It's easy to think we can not participate in that because we can imagine it totally in interpersonal terms. I'm not being mean to anyone today. But when you start moving into judgment, being of Caesar and of empire, can you really say you don't? I can't. Yeah.
Didn't Caesar keep warring factions apart?
So good point. So there are great gifts of the Roman Empire. How many of you have seen the movie Life of Brian? Okay, so go and watch it if you haven't seen it, and watch it again if you haven't seen it in a while. There's a hilarious section. So Life of Brian is kind of contemporary with the Jesus movement. It's an amazing parody. But at this moment, we're like, nothing good comes from the Romans, except the roads, and the plumbing, and they keep going on, and all right. Plenty of things come from the Romans, right? Because there's lots of good things that come from living in civilization, right? Like plastics aren't bad, they're just complicated, right? Like, do you really want to live in a world without plastic? I mean, it's hard to even imagine anymore. It's hard to even imagine anymore. And the question is, can we?
He just said he did.
But I mean, it's just, yeah, so to your point, right? The Romans have done a lot of amazing things, and the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, right, is the same as the peace of Tito in Yugoslavia, is the peace of the Tsar in Russia, right? I'll murder you if you don't play nice, right? I mean, is it peace? It's not out and out violence because everyone knows that they're under threat of violence from a disproportionately large power. So like, yeah, you have to figure your stuff out because we'll just kill you, which is what they did on a regular basis. Matthew's written around the years 90, maybe, AD. You know what happens in 70 AD?
They burned down the temple.
Burned down the temple and the whole city, all of Jerusalem, gone. Trash heap for hundreds of years. No one's occupying it. They just destroy it. I mean, that's what they do.
So, cut to the chase, is the U.S., the Caesar, in this current thing, keeping the size apart, keeping Palestinians, you know, are we the boogeyman? Are we the ones who say, you try it, just push us?
So interestingly, this is where a lot of kind of game theory comes in, and I don't really want to talk about this that much in this context. I'd love to talk about this elsewhere. But this is kind of where game theory comes in about what is it that makes for peace between peoples, and some people really believe that domination is what makes for peace. That's the whole logic of totalitarian government. And it works, kind of, right? Like Yugoslavia almost got to the place where people were willing to let down their ethnic identities and identify as Yugoslavs instead of being Serbian, Bosnian, Croatian, Albanian. It almost got there, and then Tito died, and then the whole thing fell apart, and now we have waves on waves of historical genocide that now all of a sudden reach back to 1140, and everybody's claiming, I mean, guys, watch Kosovo, right? We're talking about Ukraine, and we're talking about Gaza. Watch Kosovo, because that's another flashpoint in history and the moment that's been there for 1,000 years, or at least there's a narrative that keeps coming back, right? And again, this empire thinking keeps coming back, but I'm digressing a fair bit. I know. Appreciate you guys. I want to talk about freedom for a second, because I mentioned freedom earlier. One of the things that we think about a lot when we think about this issue of do we pay taxes to Caesar or not, can we be free of being complicit in empire or not? There's a freedom that we talk about there that I call cheap freedom, and I relate it to Bonhoeffer's concept of cheap grace. It's this freedom that comes from having no responsibilities and no accountability. Do you remember a time in your life where you just got to do whatever the hell you wanted? Where you could just be like, I'm out, later, I don't owe anybody anything. It wasn't really true, but it felt true, and it felt really good for a minute, right? You just abscond, no one is looking for you, do whatever you want. That's the kind of freedom that's outside of relationship, where you don't owe anybody anything, no one's looking for you, you don't have any relationships at that point. And that's a cheap freedom. That's the freedom of empire, is you can have all the power in the world and you don't have to rely on anybody or anything else. You can be completely separate. You just got your bucket of money, and you can move wherever you want in the country, you plant yourself and do whatever you want. Oh, those lights are so bright. Oh man, I'm so sorry. I totally put a note up there and I can't read it because I wrote it too small. What are the things of Caesar? What are the things of Caesar? Say it again. Public utilities. There are so many ways that we benefit from being part of these systems and structures. And so the question is really like, where are we going to live into a freedom for something instead of a freedom from something? I think in so many ways this question about what is Caesar's and what is God's has been about what's controlling your life, right? What's in charge? What are you orienting around? And this desire to not pay taxes to Caesar has been this desire for freedom from da-da-da-da-da. But I want you to think about for a second, what are the things that you really want freedom from in your life right now? Is it pain? Is it fear? Is it doubt? Is it hopelessness? Despair? Is moving away from responsibility and relationship and dependence going to get you those things? Or moving towards relationship, responsibility, and interdependence going to get you those things? And then I think about the freedom of God, which is the freedom for. Because there's this kind of freedom that says, I don't care. And then there's this kind of freedom that says, I care so much, I will give up anything for this. That's the Jesus freedom, right? It's not, I don't care about my life. I used to say martyrdom was an act of suicide. I used to say that when I was an evangelical atheist. I used to talk about it a lot all the time. Like if you're martyring yourself, you're just choosing to die. How many of you are familiar with nonviolent social resistance? Okay, so do any of you know about the red light, green light kind of organizing strategy within nonviolent social resistance? Okay, really briefly. When you're organizing an act of civil disobedience, right? You're going to get a group of people together to chain yourselves across a freeway, or to sit down in the middle of a bank, or the middle of the street, or whatever. You have to organize yourself around how you're going to do that. And there's kind of three categories of people. There's red light people who are down to get arrested. They're going to go in there and they're going to mess some stuff up. They're going to chain themselves across the bridge, and they're going to get manhandled. They're going to get thrown in jail. They're going to be separate from their families for potentially weeks, months, years. Think of the plowshares movement, the folks that used to throw blood on the nuclear weapons, right? They're red light. They're ready. Then there's the yellow light people that are there at the protest. Maybe they're taking photos. Maybe they're filming. They're not trying to get arrested, but they know they could get arrested, right? They're in it. And then there's green light people. they're not going to get arrested. Why are they not going to get arrested? They're not there. But why can't they get arrested? Why are they choosing the green light instead of yellow light or red light people? They got little kids. They got medical conditions. They got work that they can't lose. They got shit that needs to get done. They can't be in prison. They can't be in jail. They can't get arrested. They're undocumented. They're in danger. They're in abusive situations. They can't have their name in the paper. Who's more important in the work? We're tempted to say that this person is more important in the work. Because they're the one out there risking it all, right? It's all God's, none of it's Caesar's. Who's paying this person's bail? Who's watching this person's kids? Right? It takes all of us. But we've been kind of conditioned to think that it's only these radical folks that are storming the Capitol demanding the end of the occupation of Gaza. These are the real actors. This just happened this last week. Huge numbers of Jewish Voice for Peace showed up in the Capitol building with another organization I can't remember, not in our name. And, hundreds of them got arrested. Those are red light people, but they're not there without all of these yellow light people and all of these green light people making that happen. And so I'm here to tell you that, sometimes we have to let some stuff be Caesar's so we can take care of what our responsibilities are. There isn't a purity. There isn't a right answer to this. It's not this stuff is God's and this stuff is Caesar's. It moves because what's our goal? We didn't come here to be right. I'm sorry if you did. The church is not going to give you moral cover. I am never going to give you the right answer. I apologize in advance, especially those of you joining the church. But we came here to be free. And so sometimes some stuff is Caesar's so we can have more freedom. Because the ultimate thing that's going to be our primary, most consistent, and most frustrating moral guidance is going to be our capacity and willingness to love.